Well, what a treat. It's my great pleasure to introduce to you today's keynote speaker, who's a living legend here at Southern Cross University and probably into the halls of justice itself. David Heilpern was teaching criminal law way back in the really primeval days before Southern Cross University was even a university. It was the Northern Rivers College of Advanced Education or something like that. David was teaching criminal law and would, I remember David advertising his lectures in criminal law in the local rag and inviting members of the public to come along so we could learn our rights when we got arrested or searched or anything like that, which is a really good old tradition of the university to actually have public lectures and have lectures available to the public. So a fine old tradition, David. David played a really pivotal role in the formation of the School of Law and Justice at Southern Cross University, played an equally pivotal role in the formation and foundation of the Northern Rivers Community Legal Service. David has served as a magistrate from Dubbo and Moree to Ballina and Byron Bay and Lismore and parts beyond and between. David's been a staunch advocate for many years for drug law reform. David conducted his own Masters of Research here at Southern Cross University into sexual assault among male prisoners. What else can I say? I give you alumnus of the decade and raconteur extraordinaire, David Heilpern.
I've got it here. Can you hear me clearly? Yeah. All good. That's great. I'll put down this mic then. Thanks for that introduction. It is a great pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. I actually stayed, and thank you for your hospitality, dinner, a room. It was great. I didn't have to go home to Byron Bay. I could enjoy the Gold Coast overnight, but I thought the conference was still there. And so I moseyed up at about, 10:15 thinking it'll be fine. And then they told me it was here. So I blame you entirely for that. Here I am. So I appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts with you. In preparation, I read through all of your abstracts and thesis topics that I could find, and what an incredibly talented and dedicated and interesting bunch. Everyone I've spoken to has been doing interesting research, whether it be community herbalism, naturopathy or herbalism, whether it be grandparents, of whom I'm one. I've got a great saying about that, which is grandparents and grandchildren love each other so much because they have a common enemy. It's a Woody Allen line. It's not my own, but I really like it. I don't know if you're allowed to quote Woody Allen anymore, but anyway, and doesn't that raise a whole issue about what research or what jokes we can even use anymore in terms of, well, if someone's done something really bad, maybe we shouldn't research them or quote them at all. Refugees, nature and healing. I just had such an interesting conversation about a healing forest here at the Gold Coast. Who knew? So I was just enthralled reading through the stuff and thinking, how lucky are we all to be in this environment of learning and sharing our learnings. And the farm presentation just before, I grew up on a farm, I just thought it was intriguing and full of dilemma, of course. So first, I'd like to acknowledge country, but I'd like to do so in the longest acknowledgement of country you will have ever heard. By telling a small story that sums up for me what acknowledgement of country is really about, and maybe tells you something about my background at the same time. But there's a quiz first. Where is the oldest man-made structure? Oldest person-made structure in the world? Come on, let's have a guess. Come on, you're all smart. Have a go. No prizes for losing. Up the back, oldest man-made structure in the world.
Machu Picchu.
Machu Picchu.
The storage units that the Indigenous people of Australia used for grains.
Very close. Storage units for grains, yes.
There's standing stones in Victoria that are the astrological solstice
There are.
older than Stonehenge.
There are. The fish traps at Brewarrina, spot on. 37,000 years old. And when you fly into Brewarrina, they make this incredible pattern as far as the eye can see, so that when the river flooded, the plains would flood, and they built these intricate traps, and they'd have to put in one rock, and it would allow the water out and keep all the fish, or keep the water in and allow all the fish to be stored there for, until the next flood so they could eat. So I was I was a magistrate for 22 years after I left the uni the first time. And part of my circuit originally was Brewarrina. So flying to Brewarrina in a small plane, and you would see the fish traps. And then you'd go and administer justice. And one time I flew in there in a 6-seater plane and went to the courthouse, and they said, you can't lock up any kids today because there's no transport for them. It's been raining, it's been flooding a bit, so there's just no transport. And I said, well, I'll do my best. Lo and behold, a young 14, 15-year-old boy was arrested that day, so out of control, had to refuse bail. And I just thought, well, they'll have to work out a way. So I refused him bail, and I get back on the plane, and I get on the plane, and then they bring him in with his handcuffs on, and they handcuff him to the the little hand thing, and a policeman sits behind him, and I'm like, what the? Anyway, I think, well, if this is the only way to get him to the detention centre, hundreds of kilometres from his family, then, well, this is the only way, and for my sins, I'll sit next to him. So, I said g'day, he said g'day back. But I noticed as we were taxiing, he was shaking and obviously terrified. And I said to him, have you ever been in a plane before? And he said, well, I've never even left Brewarrina. And I thought, oh my God. Anyway, so plane goes to take off, starts taking off, and he starts gagging, like so frightened that he's vomiting. So I get my sick bag and I'm holding it up there, and I'm looking out the window as we're taking off, and the fish traps are all below me. And I just sort of freeze framed in my mind. And I thought, that sums it up, really, doesn't it? This whole absurd scene, a young person locked up, handcuffed to a plane, me, the magistrate, holding his sick bag as I look down on 37,000 years of history below me. I'm like, this is it. This sums up everything that is wrong and everything that comes from my heart about acknowledgement of country. That this is respecting people who have a culture so old, 10 times older than the pyramids, so much older than Stonehenge. And we do, and so in acknowledging country, I acknowledge that history, that it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So I hope you'll forgive me for telling a bit of a story from my perspective about acknowledgement of country that means something and puts it into the context of what I've been doing for most of my working life. And, one of the reasons, and you'll hear about others in a minute, but one of the reasons why I left the bench and returned to academia is because I got really sick of locking up First Nations people. In Lismore, where I sat for the last 10 years before I retired a couple of years ago, 85% of those who are locked up are Aboriginal people, and yet they make up 4, maybe 5% of the population. So that's what we are dealing with, and that is my acknowledgement to country. So I keep that tableau, that scene of me sitting there in the plane, in my mind when I'm writing about these topics as much as I can as well. And I don't know about you, but I find sometimes a freeze frame is really useful sort of mindfulness exercise, just to stop and focus on, and you must have seen it on farms and in herbalism and in all of our projects, there's a freeze frame. And for myself, I find that useful. So I want to now just turn briefly to my own postgraduate research. It was 1992. The law school had just started at Southern Cross University. Southern Cross University had not yet, or the law school had not yet moved to the new campus. We were still downtown in Lismore, where the TAFE was, and then it was us, and then it was the conservatorium. And I was representing I'll just get the description, a Gold Coast surfy desperado. That's from the Northern Star description. This was drugs at that time, 1992. Cannabis was worth its weight in gold, literally. So it was a habit of some Gold Coast surfy desperados to come down to hippie land and steal as much cannabis as they possibly could, take it back to the Gold Coast, sell it, and register their car, whatever. But this guy had come down with a gang of young people, armed. He was 19, and they'd gone to Huntable Falls community and held up a whole bunch of hippie commune dwellers and stolen all of their cannabis. No one was killed, fortunately, but people were quite injured. And they all got arrested on the way through Moorlambar. So I was acting for one of these young men who my paralegal at the time described as extremely cute. He looked, I reckon, 15, 16, long blonde hair, very slight, and quite effeminate in a sort of surfy dude kind of way. In any event, he was refused bail, and I was seeking bail for him. And he described to me what was happening to him in prison, involving assault and fear at that time of sexual assault. He'd been put into a cell by himself for his protection, but that was not going to be possible once he was sentenced. So I was seeking bail for him. And I said at one point in the bail application that he was really vulnerable to sexual assault and that sexual assault happens in prisons. And the judge, crusty old bastard that he was, said, well, where's the proof of that? Where's the evidence that anyone gets sexually assaulted in prison? And I thought, well, have you watched a movie lately? Or, I made some mumbling comment, and he said, I'll tell you what, I'll give you 36 hours. Come back here with proof, some research that shows that people are vulnerable to sexual assault in prison. And I thought, well, I'm a university lecturer. I can find this evidence. The internet was just starting, and there was no research in Australia. In fact, there was no quantitative research anywhere in the world of prisoners and sexual assault. And I thought this was really quite crazy. Anyway, it wasn't obviously in time for him. He got sentenced to jail and killed himself in prison. And it spurred me to undertake world-first research, quantitative research into sexual assault of prisoners. I interviewed 300 prisoners all around New South Wales prisons, all aged 18 to 25, about whether they had been sexually assaulted in prison. They gave me study leave at the university to do it. I got a grant. I just wanted to tell you one thing I remembered, because I'm on the ethics committee here now as the legal rep, and my ethics application for this research, you can imagine how high risk this research was. Going into prison, sitting down with young people, saying, have you been sexually assaulted? Like no consent, no nothing. It was a one-page document that I gave to the ethics committee, who was a couple of, ad hoc people who just said, yeah, sure, Dave, go for it. So that was it, my ethics application. How things have changed, huh? So, and I sit there on the ethics committee thinking, my research never would have been done. I don't know if that's a bad thing or a good thing, but anyway, so I interviewed all these prisoners, and I had others, because 300's a lot. After about 200 of the welfare officers in the jails agreed to do it, and corrective services at that time was led by a fellow called Professor Tony Vincent, and he was totally supportive of this research. I don't think that would have been the case since. In any event, 1 in 4 said that they'd been sexually assaulted. It was confusing a bit because a lot of these relationships were protective relationships, older man, younger man, protection from other predators or violence. But once I got over the definition of consent as including coercion, then it was pretty clear. Incidentally, 1 in 2 of them had been the victim of physical violence other than sexual. So prisons were pretty brutal places. So I wrote up this research as a master's and published the results, part of which turned out to be a book called Fear or Favour, Sexual Assault of Young Prisoners. They are the most imprisoned race in the world. And from the time I started as a magistrate, in 1998 till the time I finished in 2022, the pure number of Aboriginal people in jail had climbed by 4, and the percentage had increased. Their numbers of prisoners had more than doubled. So any concept of jailing less was not taken up as a result of my research. Also, it led to this crazy situation where in all states and territories, the Parliament passed legislation making the government not civilly responsible for any assaults on any prisoners at any time. So no one can sue the government, even if they put a known rapist in a cell with a victim. So you'd have to say that the results of my research, which I thought would completely change the world, were mixed. In America, the situation was entirely different. This is the Australian version of the books. I gave away the rights to the American version of books, one of the worst financial decisions I've ever made, because although it sold a few thousand copies here, in America, it just went through the roof, and an organisation called Stop Prisoner Rape were the beneficiaries of that, which is good. But a coalition of the Christian right, who just basically didn't want people having sex, and the sort of prison liberation left, coalesced, and a bipartisan and unanimous vote of Congress and the Senate in the United States passed the Prison Rape Elimination Act. And it still exists, and it creates a body that makes prison funding dependent on taking steps to reduce prison rape, enforces surveys and the like. So it really has made a considerable difference in the United States. What did it do for me? Well, it was fantastic for my career doing this research. At that time, Southern Cross University research that made front pages of newspapers around the world was not such a big deal. It didn't happen very much, and it was a big deal. It meant that I got to go to America. I addressed parliamentarians there, and my book was well known there. And I think it really has reduced victimhood within prisons. It meant I became a senior lecturer, which was sort of fairly exciting, and then eventually a magistrate. And I think the book really helped me, and the research really helped me in my career, because it's universally accepted by thinking people that rape should not occur in prison, that this is a bad thing. I say among thinking people because, you know, the Victorian government just a few years ago ran an ad against drink driving, and the last scene of it was a person being led into a shower room in a prison where obviously what was going to happen was not good. In other words, they were using the threat of prison rape as a tool of stopping drink driving. I mean, go figure. What planet do they come from? Anyway, that's just a little bit of editorializing. And it also meant that now there's established legal authority that in sentencing young offenders, you have to take into account their vulnerability within the prison system, not just to sexual assault, but to physical assault as well. So there were some changes for the world and for me. And this is what I want to focus on for the rest of the time before I open up for questions. How are we going for time? I didn't realise the effect this research had on me, and I really want to focus on that. I mean, I came in late to your thing, but I was thinking that it tied in, I'm sorry, your first name? Jen, about farming, and also some of the studies I noticed. I think your new prez is looking at refugee issues. There's a whole lot of other, you're dealing with people with significant mental illnesses. And I didn't realise till many years later the impact that doing that research had on me as a human in terms of vicarious trauma. And I want to focus on that because, not just because that topic is so hard, but because the most important person in your research journey to look after is yourself. And that's what I wanted to just spend a few moments on. So from my experience, I finished that research. I stayed on at the uni for another few years, and then I got appointed as a magistrate. And that was right at the time that there was an explosion of child pornography, the internet growing. And we got overwhelmed, all of us magistrates got overwhelmed with cases involving child pornography. And for some reason, people who delve into that awful dark space do it en masse. So that when we were sentencing people, we would often get given a folder this big with, I kid you not, VHS videos or beta videos or later discs. And we would have to look at it all to assess the seriousness for sentencing. This was an incredibly unhealthy experience for me. I'm sure there are other people much more resilient than me, but for me, it was horrific after a time. Started waking up with these images in my head that I couldn't get out, so I stopped going to sleep. So I'm sure all of you know the spiral downward that trauma can bring. And then there was the Royal Commission into child sexual abuse in institutions, which led to, for senior magistrates like I was by then, a massive increase in sexual assault cases. In fact, that's just about all that I was doing, and most of them involving children. So, this started really impacting on my mental health. I dealt with one particular case from the Channon in northern New South Wales involving the perpetrator who had been a senior lecturer at this university, who ended up getting 46 years in jail, and the mother of the children got 13 years in jail. And so that says it all, really. And I did that case for 6 months. And by the end of that, I was just a complete wreck. And it took me taking some time off, and of course, great support of my family, my friends, my faith, a lot of great support, to realise that the drip, drip, drip of vicarious trauma, the drip, drip, drip of pressure, I think the best metaphor is it's like a big foam sponge. As the drips are dripping into it, it looks dry. It's not leaking at all, but it's filling up. And the start of the dripping for me was definitely the research that I had done. These days, there would have had to be protocols put in place. There I am interviewing young men and just leaving them to their fate in prison after them explaining in graphic detail what was happening to them. And at the time, I was just like, that's pretty shit, but it adds up. And it certainly added up for me. So I ended up taking some time off the bench and going to a retreat centre, which was great, trying talk therapy, which was useless because I'm a boy, then trying medication, which was even more useless because it just made me feel numb, and finally doing something called EMDR, which I don't know if any of you know, but if anyone had said to me that wiggling fingers in front of your face would really help with trauma, I just would have laughed at them, but hell, I'm a bit of a hippie, so I thought I'd give it a try, and it was brilliant for me anyway. So then I went back to work and realised that the worst way of dealing with trauma is to stay in the trauma environment and re-traumatise yourself. And plus, I was dissatisfied with work for a range of other legal reasons that I've spoken about: Aboriginal overrepresentation, drug laws, etc. And so I left. So and then, funnily enough, I just got a call out of the blue and asked if I wanted to be a dean here. So I'd sort of decided in my head to leave, and then thought, well, why not hit up the law school I once was at? So I'm back, and the law school is a vibrant and exciting and happening place with growing student numbers, which is pretty exciting. Okay, so what's the point of all of that? Well, my message to you is multifold, multi-focused. Firstly, your research can change the world. Every one of those papers and abstracts that I read, I was like, wow. And for my sins, I did not know about the kind of exciting postgraduate work that was happening at Southern Cross. And all of them are really quite exciting. I thought I'd be interested to read any of them. So, smother me. Secondly, it can and will be brilliant for your career if you finish it. Obviously, you know, I'm too old to have much of a career anymore, but if I did, I would continue to do the kind of research and do the kind of research that you're doing, because it will be fantastic for your career. But I would also not hesitate to say that the most important person in your research is you. Because if you're not looking after yourself in that process, then you're not going to finish. You're going to do what so many students actually do, which is get through this, partway through this, and the anxiety and the pressures and the divorces and the kids mucking up and the whole catastrophe stops you from doing it. So you have to look after yourself. I did not do that and paid the price many years later. And I also think it's worth focusing, well, if you don't finish this, is it the end of the world? And of course it's not. You know, you go on to be all the other things in your life, but reading through each of your abstracts, what a shame it would be if they weren't complete, because the research is so important and does in some way or other change the world. So it's not just the kind of pressure I was under, the sort of pressure of vicarious trauma, but it's also just the pressure of getting the words down, the financial pressure that involves, you know, you'd all be better off being a plumber than doing what you're doing now. And I get that. And the pressure of finding that time, for me, doing my master's was like having this little black cloud that followed me wherever I was. Because anything that I was meant to be enjoying, like surfing or playing with the kids or beating them up or whatever, was like, I should be studying. I should be finishing this. And those pressures are just as chronic, really, I think, as the sort of more extreme end of the trauma experience that I had. So look after yourselves and look after each other. What a fantastic organisation this is, because it gives you the connections and the roots to be able to say to someone else who really understands what you're going through as you know, because the worst process for me, I had no trouble writing up my research. I had no trouble with the stats and the graphs and everything else. The proofreading was death. You know, I just could not stand it. I would get the thing and I'd look at it and my eyes would swim. You know, and I would just think, anyway, you know, it was so chronic for me that I actually got some funding for someone to proofread it. It was the best thing I ever did. Is there funding available for that sort of thing now? Yeah. So, I mean, who would be a proofreader, really? Okay. So I just wanted to finish before answering, dealing with any questions, with this quote from Bertrand Russell in 1962. And I do, the word nervous breakdown, of course, is you know, it's so old-fashioned, but you'll get the meaning. The key symptom of an approaching nervous breakdown is the belief that one's thesis is the most important thing in the world. I thought that was totally apt. So thank you for inviting me and thank you for your time and your attention. And I'm really happy to deal with any questions about anything in the whole world.
Look, on behalf of everyone there, thank you so much. It was a real joy having you along. And I do hope we have some questions from the audience. Yes, Tam's in. So Tam is my outgoing president and new secretary.
Hey, so I was just wondering, when you were doing the interviews at the start, what was your impression of how underreported it was?
When I was doing interviews of the prisoners, you know, there was a local member in Grafton called Michael Yabsley, and he had said rape, he was Minister for Corrective Services, and he had said rape is inevitable in prison. And it didn't cause a ripple. I mean, there was a headline, but, you know, it was sort of treated as a bit of a joke. And the truth is that even though it was never reported, why wasn't it reported? Because prisoners wouldn't report it within the system for obvious reasons. Most people were deeply, like so many victims of sexual assault, were deeply ashamed. And also underlying this, and I know this is hard to believe in the context of 2024, but a significant number of ill-educated people, and most prisoners were, believed that by being sexually assaulted, it made them gay. Now, I know that that sounds absurd to us from this context, but from an old man's point of view, who grew up in schools in the 60s, that is not a ridiculous. And so there was so much shame and so much institutional silence around it that no one would talk about it. When I would speak to prisoners about it, as long as it was anonymous, they were happy to talk. But their main concern was anonymity. Don't take my name down. Don't ever say anything. Don't say anything that could identify me, because they were frightened. So yeah, to answer your question, it was a hidden secret that was common knowledge, and I know those two things don't gel too well, but yes.
And I think Michael Yansley wasn't just a local member, he was indeed the Minister for Prisons at some point.
Yes, that's right.
The Minister for Prisons telling you, well, you deserve what you get when you go to prison.
Sorry, were you done with that?
Yes.
I'm wondering, what would be your advice for, I guess, getting your research to change policy? I know that's a huge question, and obviously you said you had a bit of luck maybe, because some people got hold of your work, but yeah, just curious to know.
Yeah, I think that it's such a difficult question. I mean, I don't really know the answer. How do you get your research to impact on policy? I mean, I think that if we remain true to our values in our research, like I really tried to not glorify, not sensationalise in the thesis itself and in the publicity afterwards. But then the first chapter of the book is just a verbatim description by one person for 6 pages of their experience in prison. And it is so, I wouldn't, books don't have an over 18 warning. But, I used to tell people, don't let your kids read it. I also used to take it to court, that chapter, and give it to young people and say, have a read of this. Next time you come before the court, this is what's happening. But that graphic and sensationalist bit seemed to make all the difference. If I can just use your research just for an example. Sorry, I don't know your name, but the research about No in the Forest. Hampson. So if you can find a person who actually has had their life changed from a lifetime of horrific mental illness to, by virtue of forest therapy, living I was going to say normal, terrible word, but a productive, happy life, or at least not being in and out of mental hospitals and being violent, then that's the story. And that one person, and look at, we briefly touched on something that I'm involved with now, which is, and the whole university is involved with now, which is psychedelic assisted therapy for PTSD and the like. One story one story changes policy better than a whole lot of theory does. So if you can get your research to a point where it's still robust, but you've got one story that's at the front of the pack, whether it be one story about a farmer or one story about about a herbal, about it working as a community herbal, then because we're all caught up in the robustness and the correctness of our theoretical approach and our research and all the rest, but it's the one story that will sell. And how do I know that? Well, I could have talked about acknowledgement to country, or I could talk about the aeroplane trip. And what sticks, what changes things is stories. And stories aren't about a mass. They're not about research. They're about an anecdote. And we are so trained in all our research. I'm supervising a honours thesis at the moment, where it is just anecdotal, but it is so powerful that it's valuable. Does that help?
Absolutely.
Well, I've actually had a follow-up question to that, David, because my career's been in community development for most of my life. And my first project was during my honours year at university. And it was about creating a youth refuge and medium-term accommodation service in St George, Sutherland, when Sexy Rex Jackson was the Minister for Youth and Community Services.
Who ended up going to jail.
Anyway, but St George, Sutherland was the only part of Sydney that didn't have a youth refuge. Finally, we got a community. We started with a small steering committee. We got more of a representative community-based committee going with it. And one of them was the local young preacher from Uniting Church. And we've been going, look, we've been knocking on doors, we've been trying to get through to Rex Jackson's office, and all his minders keep us away at bay and all that sort of stuff. And he said, haven't you heard about a press release? I said, what? And it was like, so he taught us how to write a press release. And next thing you know, he's on the news and he's saying Rex Jackson is an orphan himself and the Minister for Youth and Community Services, and yet his own electorate doesn't have a youth refuge. And this is over Channel 9, Channel 7 and Channel 10 and the ABC. So what I'm asking you is, when you say if you've got a really good story and you want to get it out there, are you saying that, you know, making good connections with the mass media, for instance, might be part of the solution?
Or get the right person to sell the story. So, you know, and you obviously were there at the right point of time. But, you know, I'll give just an example to illustrate exactly what we're both saying, and I think we'll answer the question. So I helped start Nimbin Hemp, which is a drug law reform organisation, and we started the Mardi Gras and, you know, the whole catastrophe out there. It's fantastic, really. You know, what's the definition of confusion? Father's Day at Nimbin. So, you know, it's like, it was a great environment. I loved it. There's another joke about that too. Oh, anyway. So, but nothing happened with medicinal cannabis. There was research after research after research. Nothing happened. You know, kids with epilepsy, blah, 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 you know, and you'd think from what I said before that this was the story that would sell. You know what it was? There was a woman who was a nurse and her husband, who was a drug squad detective. They were in Tamworth and they had a son called Luke. Her name was Lucy Haslam, and he was dying of cancer, and they got cannabis for him and it helped enormously. And because they were straight, because he was a policeman, because she was a nurse, because of all of that, A Current Affair loved them. It wasn't a bunch of hippies at Thunderball. It wasn't anything like that. These were it changed. It was like this story took off, and probably all the groundwork and the research helped. But truly, it was like this bingo moment of radical change that led to now 1 million prescriptions a year in Australia. Like, wow. So I suppose that answers both questions. It's getting the timing right and getting the straight story right. Up the back, there's a question.
Yeah. Okay.
Hello, thanks so very much for that. I thought, oh, law, keynote speaker, I'm not into law.
Yeah, me neither.
But it was really profound for me because my research is about finding the story and finding stories. So first of all, I want to thank you for sharing your story. The whole presentation was really engaging, and I found myself, you know, gasping and empathising and all those emotions that come with hearing a story. Going back to my own research with finding a story, so I'll be inviting a number of participants, but it's like looking for the diamond in the rough. Have you got any tips for finding that one story that's going to make policy change?
You know, I think there's a beautiful saying which is, you don't find your guru finds you. And, you know, I think have faith that this person will turn up. That if your research is sound, and I know this sounds a little bit nim and cosmic, but truly, if your research is sound and you've created the environment, you know, out of every lush patch of soil, a beautiful plant will grow, and your person will find you. Who would have thought Lucy Haslam would pop out of no one would have found her Do you know what I mean? It's like, and similarly, I guess my story started with a young person who sadly was gone, but it was enough. So I think have faith, especially on the story thing. And I want to pick you up on something that I've been writing about a lot lately, which, as you said, you empathise. And, you know, I've been writing and researching and struggling with the difference between empathy and compassion a lot lately. Empathy means putting yourself in the shoes of the other person. Not good as a researcher. And I can tell you, not good as a magistrate either. Compassion means wanting the best for them and wanting them to be free from suffering. And it's such an important distinction for me in my practice, in the way I practice law, the way I teach, just making sure that, you know, when a student comes to me with all the woes in the world and telling their story, if I empathise, it actually gets in the way of me being able to help, putting myself in their shoes, because I just get filled up with shit, how horrible this is. But compassion is a whole different thing. I'm sure you're aware of that distinction anyway. Yes, but you know, I reckon just have faith. They'll come to you.
It'll jump out.
Well, we'll take two more questions. Sorry, it's Richard and then Alison and then sorry, Jen.
No, that's okay. I'll ask him later.
Yeah.
He'll stay around, right?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Hello, David. I'll try to be very quick. I am one of your candidates from your discipline. My name is Richard. It means a great deal to me that you are here. And what I'm about to say, please don't take it as a personal attack. I do not intend to do that.
No, please put your mouth close, or take it away if you're going to say something mean. But otherwise,
I loved everything that you said. I'm a practicing lawyer, so it resonates a lot with me. Until, of course, you gave the quote from Bertrand Russell, and now I do feel that I do need to go directly from here to a psychiatrist, because that cloud that you speak of really is a thunderstorm sometimes. I guess what I want to say is this. As I mentioned, it's hugely important to me that you are here. It also is really important for me personally to hear that you think and the university think our research matters, because sometimes we don't hear that enough. If I could say one thing, and I am quite nervous saying this, because I'm worried you're going to expel me from the program or something. No. That has to be lived as well as just spoken. It is not always clear to us who are out there in the wilderness that the university even knows we exist, let alone the university cares what we are doing. This program comes at considerable personal cost to us, as you know, financial costs, emotional costs, spiritual costs. It's rewarding, but there is a significant cost. And just to hear you say it means something, it's important, is really helpful for us. But it could be lived more. For instance, I spoke to a senior academic here who did not know this conference was on, and I've been saying to Craig and Alison, on the graduate school website, there's no mention of a single candidate. There's no profile. There's no visibility for us at all. If I could just communicate that to you, and perhaps I should have said this afterwards, I'm sorry.
No, look, I'm so glad you did.
I didn't say that because it means so much that you're here, but we've got to see more of it.
Look, I'm really glad you raised that, and I've got your name and you'll be expelled very shortly. No, seriously, I am genuinely really glad you raised it. And you're right. I did not know what Praxis was. Yeah. I didn't know it existed. Yeah. Now, that's down to me, and I take responsibility for it. But you would have thought, as the head of discipline of law here, that something would have passed my desk with the word Praxis on it before I received an invitation to be the keynote speaker. And as soon as I get that, I just go, yes, you know, glory be. But you're right. There's not enough emphasis and not enough support. I mean, you should have, I don't know what your research topic is. Now, how bad's that? You know, that sums it up.
I've never spoken to you.
Never spoken to me at all. I wouldn't know who your supervisors are. Absolutely. And part of that is structural. I'm not making excuses, but that is that the postgraduate is dealt with outside the discipline. Now, that never used to be the case. When I was doing my master's or people were doing their PhDs, it was within the discipline. There was no such thing as a graduate college. And the second thing is that in the law area, and I think in other areas, Two, at this university, the research side and the postgraduate side has been run down at the expense of student numbers and undergraduate courses. So when I started, I was given a really clear instruction, 3 words, bums on seats. We've done that. Law is looking great. But it's certainly time now for you and I to sit down and seriously have a cup of coffee and see what we can do to mend this so that no law student has to feel isolated from the discipline at all. Part of how I see that in my own mind, I don't know what you think, but there you are, a practicing lawyer doing your PhD in law. Why aren't you tutoring? Why aren't you marking? Why aren't we getting you involved with our students and part of the faculty? Why don't you then get staff email and a shared or internal only, perhaps no view of the C office, so that you're actually having conversations over the photocopy machine and being part of us. We're desperate for markers. We're desperate for tutors. And that's, after all, the Oxford, Cambridge, whatever tradition, is that people doing their PhD should be in there, in the faculties, spreading the joy.
I did experimental psych at New South and all my tutors, well,
Yep.
PhD and master's candidates.
So it's great that you asked the question and you'll be the first.
One last question from Alison.
No, it's an answer exactly the same. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think
A lot of so important.
Well, that's great. So why don't we do this? Why don't we, after we're finished here, because obviously I get together with the other heads of discipline, and we've got no money and no power, but we have a lot of care. And let's get that channel open. I think it is, I do think that having the graduate college, obviously there's a lot of pluses with that. You get a quality that you probably weren't going to get otherwise. So there's pluses, but the minus is that disconnect, and let's get rid of that.
Yeah.
Great.
Right. I've just got a quick question from back in the day as a Lismore local when just taking into consideration your background in drug law reform and when you were working as a magistrate, there was a police blitz on swabbing drivers for cannabis, and the rumour through the town was that it clogged up the local court for months, weeks, and the local magistrate was pulling his hair out. Was there any truth to that rumour?
Yeah.
And considering your drug reform background, what do you think of testing drivers for?
It's a great question, and it's an area, of course, that is now the latest research. Can I put it in the research context?
Yeah.
There's this fantastic study of 40 medicinal cannabis patients done by Swinburne University, all of whom were not cannabis users beforehand, started taking their medication. And they put them in driving simulation and et cetera, and there's no impact. Like there's no negative impact if you take as prescribed your medicinal cannabis. So leaving that aside, this is the most stupid law in the world. And well, it's probably a slight exaggeration, Sharia law cutting off people's hands. There's probably some other stupid laws, but this is really dumb. And that is that if you're a medical cannabis user and you take your medicine as prescribed, you therefore are committing an offence as soon as you get into a car and drive, whether you're impacted or not. And in New South Wales, there's 240,000 drug swab tests a year, paid for out of road safety dollars to the police. So there's huge financial incentive, not for the individuals, but for the institution. So it is a completely stupid law, and it used to drive me crazy. And I did pull my hair out, and I made comments from the bench the whole time about how stupid this was, because there would be, a single mother from, I'm making this up, but a single mother from Wollongong who cleans at the bolo, lives out of town, has a couple of kids, is stressed, who wouldn't be. Living at Wollongong's just that bad, but is stressed. And so she takes barbiturates or benzodiazepines, or does what a lot of people do, goes to the doctor, and that makes her tired, and it really does impact on her driving. I mean, the studies show that it's really significant impact. And so she gets medicinal cannabis and her life changes. She sleeps really well. She's nice to her children and she works really hard. Yay. So then she gets busted for drug driving and she loses everything. She loses a job. She loses a house. She loses her kids. She can't do anything. And this was what was confronting me on a daily basis. And, if there's one thing that is disheartening, it's working in a system you don't believe in. you know, and you know, law is a bit like that, isn't it? You know, you do that every day, and I suppose you sell yourself, sell your soul a little bit every day, but hopefully it's only that much, not that much. And what I love about being back at the uni, of course, is you're doing God's work here. I mean, there's not a lot negative about inculcating knowledge and enthusing staff and doing all that sort of thing. And dealing with timetables, but you know, it's a long answer to short question. Short answer is all of that's true. It is a ridiculous law. There's a very simple solution, which God forbid Tasmania has done, which says that if you are driving while prescribed and you're not under the influence, which means, you know, whatever, then there's a defence, and you bear the burden of proving that defence, that you're not intoxicated, that you're only using in accordance with your prescription, and that it was cannabis obtained by the prescription.
Right.
And then there's a defence. And guess what? The road toll, and I'm not saying there's cause and effect here, okay, but the road toll in all mainland states is increasing massively and Tasmania's is decreasing. Now, those two things are not necessarily connected, but at least we can say this: that has not led to mass carnage on Tasmanian roads. So anyway, it's a bugbear of mine. I joined, I'm the chair of a campaign called Drive Change, which is industry funded by the cannabis industry, because obviously they have a lot to lose by this law, because so many people can't take the medication or stop taking it because they have to drive or they lose their licence. 11,000 people in New South Wales got caught last year for drug driving. About 8,000 of those are medicinal cannabis users. So, you know, it's just, it's a crazy situation. So I thought when they approached me to do this, it would be like a 6-month campaign.
Right.
I should have told them I wanted to be paid, because 4 years later, here we are, no change. Yeah, bad.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.